Hey, I'm Brad, and this is the B-Rad podcast. Thanks for being here. I've created this so that we can experience the awe, wonder, and curiosity of being human. For many years, I carried the sense that something was wrong with me. No matter how hard I tried, I just couldn't fit all the pieces together. My faith tradition promised acceptance from the divine, but I often felt this separation. He's over there, and I'm over here. So I decided to leave the path and the tradition. But what if leaving the path actually is the tradition? What if there's more going on here than what I was led to believe? Now, I know that separation is just an illusion. There's nothing wrong with me, and there's nothing wrong with you. We've simply forgotten who it is that we are. It's time for us to wake up to this divine reality, having eyes to see what has been true the whole time. It's from this heart space that I meet you here. I invite you to step off the familiar path, where together we can be radical in our becoming. Hey everyone, Brad Taves here. Thanks for joining me on the B-Rad podcast on this episode. Glad that you are here. I'm going to do something just a little bit different than I do normally. I'm going to give a shout out to the music artist right now. The artist's name is Acreage. And there was one song that you will hear at some point during this. I haven't decided where it is. I do that always after the fact. But it's called History of Knowing. And that title is interesting in and of itself. But it also lends itself to what I want to dive into today. And the main concept that I want to share with you is this idea of unknowing God. And you could definitely swap out God with anything else there. You could call it unknowing life, unknowing myself, unknowing my country, unknowing my dietary ideas, unknowing relationships. But I do want to focus on God because that's a real passionate topic for me and something that I think about a lot. And just to be totally upfront with you, a lot of what I'm going to share with you today is very new for me. Even in the last, let's say, 5 to 7 years of my life. So for the first 35 years or so, if someone were to talk to me about this, I would be very skeptical and very unsure how to handle any of this. So I don't know where this was going to land with you. You might be totally on board. You might be totally skeptical. You might be somewhere in the middle. But I do want to just share with you the things that I have learned through the insight and the wisdom of others, as well as my own inner experience and the things that seem true for me that I can validate with my own measuring stick within myself. And so that's where we're going to go. I've got a couple of different books that I'm going to highlight, and so let's get going. So the first place I want to start with is, what is knowledge? And a couple of questions specifically would be, what do I know? Or what do you know? And the next question would be, how did you come to know that? How do you have this database of information that is inside of you? So some of those things are very simple. So I could say, well, I know these mathematical equations because someone taught it to me. And I went to a particular school with a teacher and they used this textbooks, and we all agree that these equations make sense. So if you want to know the area of a triangle, this is what it is. To be honest, I don't even know what it is off the top of my head. My kids come to me with these questions of math. They're in grades 7, 9, and 10. And I'm like, oh man, I feel so stupid because I don't know what you're talking about. But at some point, I did learn these things. And we all have some database inside of us of knowledge and information. And if we're looking for knowledge and information, my God, we are not short of finding that information. Gone are the days of the libraries, encyclopedia. We've got these amazing machines and the internet to provide us with whatever we are looking for in a very short order of time. So there's not a shortage of knowledge or information. And how we find out about these things, we look for it. We ask questions, whether we ask Mr. Google or we ask a person or an author or someone that has insight and information about a particular topic. But here's another question in addition to those two, is what happens when you have experiences, personal experiences, and they don't line up with what you know. They don't fit neatly into some package, some box in which you know. You know the measurement of this box. This is how it works. This is how it worked in the past. What do you do when an experience happens to you personally, or to someone you care about, or to the environment that you might care about, or to something bigger than yourself, some group of people who are being marginalized or taken advantage of? What happens when you have interaction with life and it does not fit how you think it should be? What do you do in those moments? Something that I want to share with you that has helped me at least just name this, regardless of how you handle it. Naming it is really, really helpful. So imagine 3 columns here. I'm going to give you a couple different words. You can try them out. Maybe you've heard some of these before, but imagine 1 column, a middle column, and then a 3rd column. And this is how it goes. You've got order, column number 1. 2 is disorder, and 3 is reorder. All right? So order, disorder, and reorder. Or you could say learn, unlearn, relearn. Here's another one. Construct, deconstruct, reconstruct. I'll give you another one. Orientation, disorientation, and reorientation. So there's a couple to work with there, right? But do you get the sense where the first column is certain? There's confidence in having things neatly lined up. This is how it is. I've learned it this way. I've constructed these ideas to shape this. I have this orientation. This is the trajectory in which I am going. This is the perspective in which I see it. And if you were to ask me what it is, I can tell you what it is, right? I have that database inside of me. There's order to it. There's structure, very airtight structure. But if you slip over into the 2nd column, then you've got these orders like disorder. It could be disease, if you want to say. You're unlearning some stuff. A big concept in faith circles is this idea of deconstruction. You are deconstructing your faith. You are pulling it apart. You are analyzing. You are being hypercritical. And man, that is very helpful. It's very crazy. It's very scary to be in that place. I get that. But man, for those who are there, for those who are heading there, for those who are leaving there, it's not a bad place. It is a place that can be where you end up for a period of time. You are disoriented, right? You're confused. You have vertigo. You got spiritual vertigo. You've got physical vertigo, and things are spinning. You don't have a sense of groundedness, and you've lost that either for a period of time or temporarily. This middle column, if you haven't picked up on it already, is very unsettling. It's very disruptive because it challenges what you think you know. It challenges your sense of certainty. It's chaotic. It's a crumbling. It's a very confusing place to be in. And how we get to this 2nd column happens in numerous amounts of ways. It happens by the choices of ourselves, the choices of other people, bad timing, good timing, the economy, life, death, birth, unexpected medical bills, unexpected diagnosis, falling out relationships, right? Unending list there of things that bring us into this middle column. But to back up a second, we start with something. We start with some knowledge. And that knowledge piece is very good even from very early on in our being born, and as we grow up and we develop, there is a sense of learning and growing that we go through. We're sponges. We learn from our environment, and we start off with that stage. We can't immediately jump into the 2nd stage and think that we need to start questioning all of life and can I trust you and can I trust myself? Can I trust that person? We have to start with something that is stable. And I want to just really affirm that having order, having a clear set boundaries that's measurable, that gives us some safety and security, it's very helpful for us because it gives us a foundation to stand upon. It does give us confidence. I was talking to my son's friend this morning, went out for breakfast, and he was telling me about what he's going to be doing in high school and possibly where he's going to want to go to university. And it was interesting to hear him because he's about 14 years old, I believe. And he was just very certain. And I think his exact words was I'll be set. Meaning if I do really good in high school, I'll be set to go into this university and I can see myself working in this industry of robotics. And he was very clear that it was going to work out. And I admire that. I see the reflection of myself when I was that age. I was clear about my passion for music, and I was very interested in philosophy. I wasn't sure if I was going to do that or not, but I knew that was interest to me. And I had this if I work hard, things are going to be okay, and I'm going to see the end result happen. So what I envision it's going to happen. I'm just going to trust in that. But as we grow, as we encounter more of life, and as we're honest, I would say, we start to realize that things don't always work out. Things do fall apart. But we start off with something that is trustworthy. And that happens in our homes. That's why a good home environment is really important, to provide that sense of safety so that we have somewhere to go. Now, there's a book that was written within Christian circles that I want to highlight here. It's written by J.I. Packer, and he's an evangelical theologian. He's pretty old now. I think he's maybe in his 80s, maybe even early 90s, and he wrote a book called Knowing God. And this is decades ago. I think it's probably 20, maybe 30 years ago, and I don't have a copy of this book anymore. I'm pretty sure I read it back in the day. And what I like about this book is that it hones in on this God can be known. And if you funnel your efforts towards knowing God, then it's possible to have a clear purpose in life. So here's one sort of snippet from the book. He says, once you become aware that the main business that you are here for is to know God, most of life's problems will fall into place of their own accord. On one hand, I like that statement. I think there's truth to it. I think that there's a sense of awareness that comes along with knowing and desiring to know God. And some of these peripheral issues, they don't become so important. They start to fade. They don't have as much weight when we really hone in on this main, why are we here? What's the main purpose of why we're here? There's another line. He says, a little knowledge of God is worth more than just a great deal of knowledge about him, right? So a little knowledge, just a handful of who this God is worth more than a full room of knowledge about God that's stacked with books and cassettes, if that was back in the day, or teachings or information that if you step into a library, into some seminary, and they've got all these books, theological works and knowledge, right, about God. It's better to have a little knowledge of him, which is, again, it's a really good statement there. So as much as I like the premise behind this book, I think it is a starting point. And I am grateful that at least I grew up in an environment that did teach this know God through these channels, aka the Bible, aka the theology that we're teaching, through the words of Jesus, through the Christian community and their tradition that we're a part of, through what Paul said in the Bible, through our Bible study, right? All these things. And I'm kind of saying this a bit tongue-in-cheek because I am who I am today because of that background. But if it just stays permanently fixed in this, if you want to know God, this is how you know him. If you just stay in that place, it has some drawbacks. It has some real potential dangers if we place ourselves there and refuse to move from that place of certainty. Because I believe that if we really are to know God, we must move towards unknowing God. that becomes much more trustworthy to come into a true encounter with whatever God is, whatever name we give it, love, great mystery, the universe. It's more trusting if we balance out and we have ample opportunities to unknow God as we do to know God. That's challenging, especially if you have a paradigm and if you've been conditioned to believe that God is to be known. And if you want to know him, read this, listen to this, go to this pastor, go to this church, go to this Bible camp. All the steps are laid out to know God. And so if we are stepping into uncharted territory, then we have to suspend some of these well-worn paths that we've been encouraged to follow down. It also makes sense to me, and the more that I've been sitting with this and in thought and contemplation and meditation and lots of conversations with people who are having these similar conversations, it seems striking to me that if the universe is as vast as we comprehend it to be, then it would make sense that whatever is behind or within or surrounding all of this has to be at least as big as the universe itself. Doesn't that make sense? It seems silly to me. It's kind of comical. It's kind of sad to think that God can be reduced to one book, to one person, to one event, to a very poignant, like, this is it. That doesn't make much rational sense to me. Just cognitively speaking, I can't really understand, well, if God is as big as we say he is or it is, why is it that we're saying so strongly that this is who God is, this is his character, this is how life functions, and this is how the afterlife works, and this is how churches should be run, and this is how society should be, and this is how we should treat people who have this orientation, or this is how we need to dress in these situations. How do we get so backward thinking that this universal God, who's as transcendent as we hope he is, that permeates this entire cosmos, be reduced to something so particular? Now, the irony in all of this is that the particulars, the specifics of our life, are the gateway to the universal. Meaning that my encounter right now, if I were to open up this book in front of me, I picked up another book that I'll mention in a few minutes. If I have a moment when I read this book, or if I have a moment when I'm talking to someone, I can experience something about this big universal God in that specific moment, in this time, in this place, when they said this word, when I read this word on that page. So there's something that we can experience of the universal God, the unknown God, in something that is very known. But again, if we stay fixed on that, and if we try to cram it and hold it tightly in place and say, this is the only way to do it, you can't know God in any other way, that's problematic. That does not work in the long run. Now, a second book that I want to move to, and I just mentioned a second ago that I was talking about a book on my desk here. It's called The Cloud of Unknowing. And it was written in the 14th century by an English monk. The author is anonymous. We don't know who wrote it, which is very interesting. And the premise behind this book was to encourage its reader of the day that they could have an inner experience with the divine. They could have their own taste, their own touch, their own personal experience. It didn't have to come through another person, through another group, through some religious institution or some religious model, but it could come to them directly. They didn't have to wait for someone else to bring it to them. I've heard a lot about this author And again, I just started reading it, so I haven't gained a lot of insight just from the entire book. But the CAC and with Richard Rohr and his writings, they highlight this book quite often. So I'm going to pull from things that they've said. So this cloud of unknowing is not a passive activity. It's not something that we just sit back in our lazy boy and with our hands behind our back and say, okay, I don't know. I'm just gonna do nothing now. I'm gonna be lazy, or I'm going to just let it happen as it happens. That's not the concept here. There is an active intent that's required. There has to be a willingness from the participant to step into this practice. And the practice goes something like this. You know enough to not need to know more. So whatever knowledge you bring into your experience, you're not saying, I need to know more or I need to hold on to what I already know. But just based on what I know, I admit that I do not need to know anymore. I admit that I can surrender myself into a place of unknown, going back to what I said earlier, into a place of disorder, to unlearning. Did you ever hear that growing up for a second? I never heard that at all. It was always like learn, memorize, repeat, rinse and repeat. It was that's what I got communicated. I never heard unlearn, but that is, if we're to move forward, there is a sense of like unlearning and suspending knowledge. And when we do this, then there becomes a greater degree of endless, deeper knowing that can be encountered, which takes us something into a further place beyond what we have already experienced. Another thing that Richard Rohr has said about this is that, I believe this is Richard Rohr's words. He says, if God wants to work in your soul, God has to work in secret. If you knew, you would close down the whole mystery with your rational mind. Let that sit for a second. If you knew what the divine presence was up to, you would close down the whole mystery with your rational mind. You'd shut it down. You would say, that's far enough. I can handle that, but that other piece can't handle that. We would make a lot of judgment calls based on what we feel comfortable with. We've heard the phrase comfort zone. If we are looking at our comfort zone and we're feeling the edges and the boundaries of it, if we're not comfortable with going beyond them, then we decide not to go beyond them and we stay within them. So it seems true that there's got to be something of mystery involved, a sense of unknowing, in order for transformation to actually work in us. If it was just up to us, if it was just up to our willpower, if it was just up to our what we understood on our knowledge, then it probably would not happen to the degree that we want it to happen, or that it's at least possible of happening. I printed off, I'm just going to skip to another page I got in front of me here. So I'm going to read some snippets actually from the book itself. So this comes from this 14th century English monk. And so I'm going to give you some of his words, or her words. Okay. I know you'll ask me, how can I think on God as God? And who is God? And I can only answer, I don't know. I'll stop there. That statement there, that's a posture of humility that I didn't grow up hearing a whole lot of. And if I did hear some humility, it was always on the tail end of like a real confident statement. Or humility seemed to rise up when life has fallen apart and things don't make sense anymore. But if someone was very sure of themselves and sure of their faith and sure of their position within the community and their job and with their how they think life should be, those words, I don't know. If someone asks you who is God, I wouldn't hear I don't know in church. That would not be an answer. If someone might have thought it for sure, but I didn't hear that said. But it's a very honest, it's a very humble statement. I'm going to keep going on to the book here. We can't think our way to God. That's why I'm willing to abandon everything I know to love the one thing I cannot think. God can be loved but not thought. God can be loved but not thought. My rational mind jumps up and say, wait a second, of course God can be thought. We can have these ideas and images and metaphors, and we have historical data from these individuals who said these things. Of course we can know. Of course we can think about God and we can have this connection. But think about this for a second. If it was just thought alone, how trustworthy is that thought? The thought might have some weight to it. It can be helpful to us. It can lead us towards healthy living. But I think that thought, it must have its origin somewhere else. Thought must have its place, its birthplace from some other place. And I think love can be the holding place in which our thoughts can bubble out of. So we start with God can be loved, but not necessarily thought. And it doesn't mean that we can't have thoughts about God, but it's not divorced or separated. And it doesn't come from love. I mean, it does come from a love. It does come from something that's much stronger than just a thought. I'll keep reading here. He calls us the cloud of forgetting. So you have the cloud of unknowing, but also the cloud of forgetting. It's a cool statement. He says, let that joyful stirring of love make you resolute, and in its enthusiasm, bravely step over meditation or cognitive reflection and reach up to penetrate the darkness above you. Then beat on that thick cloud of unknowing with the sharp arrow of longing and never stop loving, no matter what comes your way. That phrase, or never stop loving, is a fantastic way to think of how we can step into the unknown. We don't step into the unknown with a sense of certainty that we're going to find something, but we do it with never stopping loving, never stop closing our heart to what is unknown. And I'll end with this last statement from the book. He says, when we reach the end of what we know, that's where we find God. That's why St. Dionysius, who comes from the 5th and 6th century, said that the best, most divine knowledge of God is that which is known by not knowing. I'll say that again. The most divine knowledge of God is that which is known by not knowing. Such a paradox, isn't it? How is it possible that we can know by not knowing? At the very beginning of this episode, I gave you these columns, and I just realized now that I didn't give you the third column, but this is a good time to give it to you. So once again, you've got order, disorder, and reorder, right? So you got the first one, second one, and the third one. So that third order, the third column is these statements, is reorder, relearning, reconstruction, reorientation, recreating. So you've gone from this place of like certainty, knowledge. I've created this thing. I have constructed my understanding. I have an eye set on this. This makes sense to me. I've learned it this way. And you moved into the second column. For whatever reason, you've ended up in a place of a lot of disorder. You're not so sure anymore. Things are swirling. Again, it's like vertigo. But at some point, there's a transition and there's a movement into a third state where now all of a sudden you're starting to reorder. You're starting to reconstruct the pieces, reorientate yourself, relearn things in a new way. So when it comes to this knowledge piece, and if we can tack knowing in these three columns, you could say the first column is to know, the second is to unknow, and the third is to re-know, if that's even a word, right? Know, unknow, and re-know. And that third column is a different way of knowing. You've gone through some experiences, you've gone through some phases, and you're starting to think differently. You're starting to know differently. And it doesn't dismiss all that you knew before, but it starts to propel you into something that is deeper. It might be difficult to get the words out to explain what you're experiencing, but just somehow you know. Somehow you've had some experience. So like, I don't know what happened. I can't explain it entirely, but I know this to be true. And I've had these moments. I'm sure you've had these moments too. Like the moments where you know that you're cared for, that you are loved unconditionally. Have you had those moments before? It could have been with another person. It could have been by yourself. It could have been in nature. It could have been the time spent with your dog, having a good meal, seeing the beautiful sunset or the trees or the ocean or meditation. Regardless of where it happened, just having this like, man, I am taken care of. I am held securely by something somewhere, and I cannot shake it. When you have that experience, when you taste these things and when you know them, you can never unknow that. And even that sometimes maybe you can let go of, and you can say, well, maybe it's different than this. Maybe it's even better than this. The sense of being loved, that sense of being unconditionally loved. If you even suspend that, maybe you'll even experience a deeper sense of being loved. Because you grow and you evolve. So your sense of unconditional love at 35 might be different than at 45. I don't know. Okay, as we wrap this up, I hope you've stayed with me. I know this is a bit philosophical and it's a bit heady and also unheady in some ways, but I got a couple takeaways or just ending comments I want to share with you. So the first one is this: we don't stop knowledge. We just start knowing in a new way. We don't dismiss and say, well, I'm done knowing. I'm not going to learn anymore. I don't need to know what's going on, and all that garbage that I knew before, that I don't need that anymore. I'm just going to be perpetually in the unknown. I don't know about that. We don't stop knowledge. Knowledge is helpful to us. It helps us drive in our vehicles. It helps us pay for food and for stuff and clothing, and it helps us interact in the world. We need order. We need to have some constructed sense of what is going on. So we don't stop all that. But what we do is we start to know in a new way. We start to open ourselves up to know differently. Number 2 is that love comes before, during, and after knowledge. Love is embedded. It weaves its way in all of our knowing, in all of our knowledge and our database and the things that we accumulate and that we learn along our lives and we unlearn. Love finds its way. It's with us all the time. It's never separate, never divorced from any of it. The next one is that forget about the God you think you know, so that you can remember the God who's never fully known. I'll say that again. Forget about the God you think you know, so that you can remember, or so that you can learn the God who's never fully known. Again, if I would have heard that a long time ago, I would have balked at it and say, of course you can know God. This is what the Bible says. This is what Jesus said. This is what the Old Testament says. This is what I've learned from people that I trust. But I think it's quite possible that we can never fully know God, but that's part of the journey. That's part of the experiences that we get to go through. And if we just reduce God to something that can be fully known, I don't know if that's the truth. I don't think that is God itself or the mystery or whatever word you put in there. There's got to be something that is unknowable about God. And we can know that unknowable through a different set of eyes, through a different set of ears. Another way to describe it is that you can hear in the silence. You can see in the dark. It sounds so paradoxical, but it's true. You can have sensory experiences that don't require your senses, and it's still validating. It's still true. It still happened. It's something that can be known. And the last takeaway here, this aphorism or a one-liner, is this: the great mystery. I think I've stole this from Richard Rohr, as I have probably a lot of things from him in the last couple of years. The great mystery isn't something you can never know. It is something you can endlessly know, endlessly discover, and endlessly explore. The great mystery is a line that comes from the Native American traditions, and that phrase they've used in their language. And I love that. I think that's a great name for God, the great mystery. It's big, it's fantastic, it's it's not completely understood. And just because it's not understood doesn't mean that we cannot understand it. That's a very interesting distinction. I think it's important to understand that, is that we might throw these words around like the universe and the great mystery and the cloud of unknowing and things that are just so beyond us, right? So if we're saying, listen, I think God is bigger than just the Bible, I think God is just bigger than what I've thought he was or it is, then if that's the case, then can I ever know it? Can I ever put my finger on it? Can I ever take a pen and write out what I think it is? Or how certain can I be that all that is true? Right? Can I have any experience with the great mystery? And this is where it's really curious to me, and it's very enticing, intoxicating, is that it's not that the great mystery, or the great unknown, if you want to say, is not knowable. It just means that it's something that we can endlessly explore. If for some reason we uncover the great mystery, it would cease to be the great mystery. Right? It has to continue to be elusive. It has to be unknowable and dark and indescriptive, right? Language is like our best attempt to describe these things, is our best attempt to describe our human experience. But the great hope in all of this is that the great mystery is something that we can endlessly uncover, that we can endlessly know. Then to know God, to know the unknown God, is something that we can endlessly know.